When I left the UPC as an organization, I was too afraid to go to a Trinitarian church because of the threats of all the curses, the strong delusion, the curse on your finances. They're always talking about the curses that you could possibly slip up. So I was terrified to leave apostolicism.
I was too scared that and convinced deep down, because that was what I was raised in, and it being reinforced over and over that this was the only truth. And what was the use of going somewhere else? Because, I remember one pastor when I was a young man, I don't remember the exact wording, but it was something to the effect of he's banging his fist on the pulpit saying, if you ever leave this church, you are doomed. And when you grow up hearing stuff like that, it impacts you because, I can have conflict with a human being all day long and walk away from that and say, well, that's just another person. But when you bring God into the picture, this omnipotent, all-knowing being, I mean, I was well aware I can't fight with God, and if this is God, my concept of God told me that was God. It was a faulty concept. But if this is what God is, then how do I go against it?
You're taught that if you go somewhere else, you're going to be deceived. If you start to believe someone else, you will be deceived. And actually, there's someone that I love very much, I grew up with, and I can tell you with my whole heart that I love her, has told me that because I have chosen to question the UPC, that I am deceiving myself. And that's what they teach. If you go outside of the UPC, you will be deceived. And so you're filled with fear. You don't know where to go. And it is truly overwhelming. It is not easy. It is really not easy, because I can remember watching other people leave the UPC and thinking there's something in their heart that's just not right. They don't love God enough. There's something about the world that they love more than God, and this is why they're leaving. And little did I know that I would be one of those people, but I had to leave to actually find God. Not that people aren't saved within the UPC, because I believe that they are, but the teaching will put a stumbling block in front of many people and drive people away from the gospel and not be able to find their Savior. And so their teachings, though, set you up to never leave. It's fear control. It keeps you on the pew. And so yeah, you can't just go somewhere else. It's not how it works.
And then I went to this little Baptist church, and they were so nice and seemed so normal. And they sung hymns, and I was like, oh, I like this. But yet I was able to hold on to my old beliefs because I thought, okay, this is too easy. A, B, C, accept, believe, confess. Where's the repentance? And then I was like, and then they do it in the titles. And I was still hung up on, the difference between oneness and the Trinity. And they never really addressed that with me. They gave me a bunch of books. I read all the books, but I didn't ever let go of my old beliefs. I didn't let any new beliefs in. Even though I read the books, I needed to see it directly from the Bible. And although they gave Bible passages in there, it was like I was looking at the Bible with this old template laid over the top of it. My old thoughts would come in there and explain away things.
I feel like shunned is a really strong word, because we still went to church and people would talk to us, but we stopped getting invited to people's houses, and people didn't really want to talk to us. So it felt like a form of shunning, but it wasn't like get out. So we decided to move to Texas because there was another assembly up in Denton. Like, we dreaded going to church at this assembly. Because it was the same junk that we'd grown up around, just different people, and it didn't get better. So I remember us sitting in the parking lot at, I think church there started at 10:30, and it was like 10:45. So we'd already gotten there a little late, and we sat there, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't do it. And my husband looked at me and said, I know, but where do we go? Are we going to hell?
So it's a very works-driven environment. And along with that, well, I say it works, but probably bigger than that is fear. Fear is huge. And everybody is always watching everybody else. You know, if they do something a little different, you know, oh my, look at so-and-so, they wore this type of dress or this type of pants, and, you know, and, or for the men, it would be more what kind of tools they use, you know, to get away with. And yeah, and that's really what keeps people there is fear. Well, then of course the shunning. So the shunning is pretty bad too. You know, obviously, you know, there's movies, Hollywood has come out with movies and stuff. They try to portray Amish about, you know, and I mean, the shunning is no joke. I would say it's probably about as bad as, you know, Islam, minus the killing. And that is what keeps a lot of people there, is because they know if they leave, their families are going to disown them. And so if you don't shun the people that are excommunicated from the church, you yourself will get excommunicated, potentially. So they don't want that. And being part of the church is their biggest bet into heaven.
The difficulty, so there's kind of a two-side thing to it. So I'll start by one is if your family is in it, and like if your parents are in it and your siblings and your immediate family is still in UPC or in a hyper fundamentalist group, and you step away from that, that is a very difficult conversation to have with your family. Whether you have that with your family or you just wait and let them figure it out and then they address it awkwardly over turkey on Thanksgiving, that you're not going to heaven anymore, that's just difficult, you know? And so that right there, I think, is a big reason why a lot of people just kind of keep plugging along and doing it, because they don't want to disappoint their family or have to have that conversation. And so I think that is a huge part in it if your family is involved. If your family isn't involved, or if they are, the other side to it is that the way that you are taught to the standard for your level of Christianity and how sold out you are, you hear that phrase a lot, you know, are you sold out, are you plugged in, is how much time you're spending at the church, which means if the doors are open, you're at the church. If the doors aren't open, you're volunteering, you're pulling weeds, you're on the cleaning crew, you're doing all of these things for the church facility, or you're doing things for other members of the church, or you're hanging out with people in the church. And so when that's all that you know as far as your circle of people, it's like just picking up and moving to somewhere new where you don't know anyone. It's very difficult to leave your identity of really who you are to say, oh, I'm not that anymore. And most of the time, I'm not going to say all of the time, but a good majority of the time, the people that you thought were your friends, people that you would spend most of your time with, people that you would see multiple days a week, no longer talk to you. They don't even acknowledge that you exist. And that is a very difficult thing.
I still remember the day when the bishop and the other elders came to my parents' house, and they literally sit down and they handed them over to the devil. I wasn't in the room or anything, but just kind of what my parents shared. It's crazy stuff. You're now part of the devil's fold, I guess. And like my mom said, so her uncle was the bishop. And yeah, she said he was shaking. I think a couple of them, they kind of knew what they were doing to a certain extent. Like, it's kind of demonic stuff, I guess, if you want to call it that. But yeah, thank God, they had a spirit of Christ, and so they didn't have anything to fear.
When we chose to leave, we knew we were leaving behind our families, because our families, like, once you leave, people are like, well, we have to go to them, and we have, like, people inside the church are saying this about people like me who are leaving. They're like, well, we need to go to them, we need to minister to them, we need to tell them they're gonna go to hell if they don't come back, and like all of these things. And what we knew we were going to face is that we would lose our families. They would no longer want to associate with us or talk to us because they truly believe there's no hope for us anymore. And so they I'm not going to say that we're like the cousin twice removed, but like we're no longer invited to like our family's weddings, like our weddings and Thanksgivings and Christmases. So we're no longer part of that family. And like not only that, but I lost all my friends that I grew up with. So like I had a pretty good core group that I grew up with at my home church in Indianapolis. And once we left, like I'm no longer in contact with any of them. And it's from not lack of me trying, but they just don't understand anymore. They're just like, well, we have nothing in common anymore. And so we lost our support system when we left, and we also had to figure out who we were, because like growing up, women do not work. They do not go to college. They do not do any of this stuff, and neither do men. Like they don't go to college either.
If you're not comfortable with being alone for a little while, that's difficult to do, and it's hard to step away from, because the people who do reach out to you with the intention of, oh, now you're backslid, they need to save you. And it's not from a place of, hey, how are you doing? It's, hey, how are you doing? When are we going to see you at church again? It's so that is a difficult thing. You almost have to do a clean break and just completely step away from it, and it's like you're starting over brand new. It is very difficult, especially if you don't have a support system, if you're not able to connect with people right away. And that's why, groups like you, and I was looking for people. I was like, man, there's got to be other people who, am I really missing the mark? If I've been turned over to a reprobate mind, we hear that phrase too. And you start realizing, no, there's other people that are going through this and dealing with this too. And that's why resources like what you have are so important, because it is very difficult if you don't have somebody else that you can just reach out to and say, hey, I'm really struggling with this, or I'm reading this in the Bible and it doesn't align with what I've been taught for the last 30 years. Am I looking for a reason to believe that this isn't true anymore? And that's, if you're really doing it right and you're really searching out your salvation with fear and trembling, it's difficult to do by yourself.
I started leaving the church, and I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do with myself. And because the UPC church teaches so strongly that anyone who is not UPC is not saved, I was scared to death to go anywhere else. I would not go anywhere else. I was locked into such a fear stage that I was at a standstill. For years of my life, I was at a standstill. And then when I was around 43, I finally decided to go to a non-UPC church for the first time. And so I only had gone to a Catholic church with my dad. But once it came time for me to go try to just find some peace in my life and try to find God, I was going to go to a non-denominational church. And up to this point, because my terror had been so great, because I would cry myself to sleep, because I would be in such fear of dying, I thought that at times I was going to go mental. Truly, I thought I was going to be mental, and I would think I need to go to therapy or something, because I'm in such a state of terror that it's affecting my life. Like, it affects everything about me, but spiritually I had never found any peace. And so I thought to myself, but a therapist, how can a therapist help me learn how to speak in tongues if my church cannot even help me speak in tongues? And so I did not seek out therapy. I stayed locked in fear and pain and dejection. So when I'm in my early 40s, I decide to go to this non-denominational church. And again, I walk into this church skeptical. And I'm going to judge these people because, I grew up Pentecostal and we have the truth. So I walked into this church. It's a huge building, and people dress all a variety of ways. And song service starts, and I feel the presence of God. And I begin to cry because I'm like, God is here in this place, just like he is in a Pentecostal church.
I want to bring this up just in case, someone hears this, that they're at this point too. But in 2015, I sat in this upstairs room in my apartment with a shotgun loaded with double-aught buckshot. That's probably the biggest buckshot you can get for a shotgun, underneath my chin for 3 hours, and wanted to end it because I was so miserable. And that there would have been no coming back from that. And that would have devastated my family, all of those things. But I sat there for 3 hours, and the only thing that stopped me from doing that was, if I pull this trigger, this is it. And if somebody is watching this and you think you've gone too far, and if you're on the brink of making a bad decision like that, no, you don't have to go to a church. You don't have to talk to a pastor, at least not now. But you can just run to the Father. Just don't make it more complicated than it is. Just lay everything down and just call out to him and come back home. So, I realized that, now looking back years before, like you said, I wish I would have reached out to another church and not been so scared to. Maybe I wouldn't have had to go through all these years. But having had the experience, I know God's grace is so big and so deep that there's no place where he can't reach you. And this idea that you're doomed if you leave your fellowship or leave your assembly, I don't buy it. I don't. And I was driving by this church off the highway, and it's funny, the church said Crossroads Grace on this big marquee sign. And I was just diving into the subject of grace at that time. Just couldn't get enough of it. Still can't. That's part of the Bible for me, is God's grace. And I see this sign that says Crossroads Grace, and I look at the words grace, and I'm like, well, if they have it on their marquee sign, I'm thinking they must know something about it. So I walked in there one Sunday, just at random, didn't know anybody, and it's quite a large church. They have 3 different services, probably anywhere between 300 to 500 people, depends which service you go to. But I sat there, got us, about 5 rows deep, and the worship music comes on, and I could feel the love and presence of God as much as I ever did in a UPC church. And I talked to you about this before, and I looked up when I was experiencing this, and I literally said, God, what are you doing here? and I said, you're not supposed to be here. And the tears just flowing, and to finally understand in a spiritual and an emotional sense that, that God wasn't confined to a denomination, that he was there and he was present. And I'm looking around and I'm like, wow, all these people have obeyed the gospel too. All these people have come to the cross like I have. And, this church is expressive enough in their worship that we lift our hands and stuff. There's no running around and jumping and crashing into walls anymore. But, there's people lifting their hands, there's tears rolling down faces and everything. And it blew my mind that God was there. And, and when the pastor got up to speak, the message was solid. It just went right to my heart. And I'm thinking, could it be that, that they were wrong? That what I was raised in, could it be that they were wrong? And the more that I've walked in it, and the more that I've walked in the true gospel and in grace, and talked to other people and been discipled, there's, my friend Jeff discipled me, Pastor Buddy discipled me, other people have discipled me. Then the more I understand how big grace is and how powerful the true gospel is. And, God was there, and he's in a lot of places that I was told that he wasn't.